Uncle Luke, show me the way to go home. That's the big idea, because home is where God is. And the big question that we need to answer is, who is the greatest? This is a great question that unravels in Luke chapter 9, verse 46 to 48. Who is the greatest? And how do we sort that out? And how do we think about that? Well, come on in. Let's check it out. All the bubbas of the world, we got one mission in mind. Welcome to the Biblical Channel. We try to keep it simple. We ain't trying to do anything big other than what God is doing in this world, and He is speaking to this world, and He gave us a book that is claiming to be His words. And God in this book says, yeah, this is how I put my words together. You know what I'm saying? So the Bible, I think in most people's minds and imaginations, is clearly worth the read. And that's all we want you to do is read your Bible, but to read it well. Gosh, the Bible's been read unwell so many times. And we just want people to say the prayers, and we want people to get together, and we want people to be able to talk God. Man, we should be able to talk God like we talk about anything. It should be easy for us, and it should be a happy conversation. We tend to make it sucky. You know what I'm saying? Anyhow, to all the bubbles of the world, to all the bubbas of the world, come on in, let's talk God. And one of the bubettes of the world that Jesus gives us His own mother here on earth, and that is Mary. And I just love what she says. She says, may my soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. Oh, that we would all talk like that. Hey, Mary, Aunt Mary, yeah, lead us on. All you tough guys, all you bubbas, pray like Mary prays. And then, of course, Jesus teaches us to pray like we actually do have a Father in heaven. And hallowed should be His name, and His kingdom is coming, and His will should be done on earth as it is in heaven. And everything we have, including the very words and the very bread that we get on a daily basis, comes from God. And what we need most is forgiveness. But that forgiveness that we need, we ought to be extending to others. And we don't want to be led into temptation. God is going to keep us from temptation, and God is going to deliver us from evil. Only God can do that. Anyhow, that is the substance of great prayer. But let's move on and take a look here at what we have in a backward step, per se. We looked at the longer passage where Uncle Luke showed us, the disciples, the dirty dozen, the new dirty dozen, having trouble casting out a demon at the bottom of the mountain when Jesus comes down. And how that leads into a conversation that Jesus has with everybody about what it actually means to follow Him. And it ends with Jesus being very clear about what it means to follow Him. But along the way, man, Jesus said things that the world, well, is forever grateful for. Because the things that the world is doing these days owes itself to what Jesus says. The way that Jesus talks totally upends the world in which He lived and the world in which we live. Jesus changes things. Nobody else can make a greater claim on these kind of changes. Nobody else gets out there and talks like this. The Buddha does not talk like this, who came before Jesus, and the Hindus certainly don't talk like this, and the Mohammedans don't talk like this. Come on, man. Let's just be honest about who talks like this and who doesn't. People don't talk like this, but Jesus does. And the way He talks only makes sense if He's God. If He's not God, then He's just speaking nonsense, and we need to not listen. But if He's God, that changes everything. Okay, that's the way this passage works. So we want to go back. We looked at this already last week. We covered it very quickly. But Jesus says to the disciples that He's trying to train. And of course, He's speaking to everybody. It's not just a disciple training mission for the 12, the dirty dozen. It's for everybody to wrap their minds around what He's saying. And so Jesus says, Uncle Luke tells us that the dirty dozen actually break out into an argument among themselves about which one of themselves was the greatest. Now, you and I chuckle because we should know, if we've read this far in the text, we should know this is so inappropriate to what Jesus is doing. But they're human beings, man. And these guys, I love them because they are not afraid to make fun of themselves. They're not afraid to show us how badly they missed it and how they think just like we think and the society around us thinks, that they are no different than us. That is so important in the way that the Bible shapes up the message to us. The people, the humans, the men that are involved are very humble people because they allow themselves to be made fun of. And then God is the one behind this process saying, these are my people. My people are glad to show others how they went wrong. And that's exactly what the new dirty doesn't do. Anyhow, let's go back to the scene. So Jesus steps into the middle of this. He knows what they're thinking. He knows their hearts. And he takes a child. So it's object lesson time. For those who cannot handle the capacity for abstract thinking, Jesus grabs an object lesson for some concrete thinking, which is kind of funny because Jesus goes to kindergarten and he grabs one of the kids, but he teaches like we're in kindergarten too, by grabbing one of the kids and pointing at the kid saying, surely you could understand what I'm going to say here. So anyhow, I think that's just a funny setup, the way that Jesus does this. Anyhow, he grabs this child and he puts it close to himself and he says to them, whoever receives this child in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives him who sent me. For he who is least among you all is the one who is great. This is how Jesus answers their question. Whoa. Let's just admit for a second here that Jesus just, drops a pretty unique bomb into human history. Jesus, by saying what he said, as his followers, implying that the one who sent him is God, is definitely doing things in a way that human beings definitely don't do things. So that's we take this stuff for granted. We think like this now. And what we're not doing is giving God credit for it, because for the last 2,000 years, it's statements like this that Jesus said that have brought us to the place that we are today. So number one, this conversation is a conversation that all human beings have. It's the way that we think. It's the way that we walk down the street. It's the way that we carry ourselves. Who's the greatest? And typically, we're trying to figure out how we can slip ourselves into the world of the greatest. And so it's either by the people that we associate with, or it's the accomplishments that we have. But we have this sense that the greatest are the ones who have done the most, the ones who have the most power, the ones who actually, do big things. Jesus says, you have not been listening. You just have not been listening. Now, keep in mind that the passage before this, right before this, Jesus just said, let these words sink into your ears. The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men. So Jesus is saying about himself as the Son of Man, I'm about to be betrayed. And do you really hear what I've been saying? Not just about the Son of Man being betrayed, but let's stop there for a second. Jesus is making it clear that he and his greatness are going to be misunderstood. The way that Jesus thinks about greatness is not the way this world thinks about greatness. It's not the way I typically think about greatness. And so that's what's on view here, is that you have to listen closely to what he's just said. Now, remember that voice on the mountain, that voice from the sky has already said, listen to him, meaning Jesus, because he's the only one. He's the only one you ought to be listening to. And listening to him, hearing his words, is going to mean you're going to have to grasp some abstract thinking. Abstract because you aren't going to find this kind of thinking in a natural state of affairs here on earth, among men or among the animal kingdom. So remember what Jesus has said so far, how he has taught the masses, how he has taught the crowds, and he has generated a lot of hearty response to everything that he has said, for one reason, because he is continually elevating the little man. He is continually elevating the little people of the world. Remember, Jesus up on the side of that mountain in kind of like a Ten Commandments, setting. The one greater than Moses is speaking, and when the one greater than Moses who is speaking, Jesus, says something. He says, blessed are those who are poor. Blessed are those who are hungry. Blessed are those who weep now. And blessed are you when people hate you on account, and they exclude you on account of me. Whoa. So Jesus' prescription for what's unfolding around him and what he is about to accomplish and what he is accomplishing is an accomplishment coming from the mountain of God. And it is him who drops this line into the audience: love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To the one who strikes you on the cheek, give him the other one. To the one who takes your shirt, to give him your jacket. To the one who begs from you, give to them. From the one who takes something from you, well, don't ask for it back. You see, Jesus says this is the higher plane. This is the greater of the achievements on earth. The greater of the achievements on earth is to actually lower yourself, not elevate yourself. Love your enemies, do good, lend, expect nothing in return. Your reward will be great in heaven. You will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. If God is kind or showing his kindness to the ungrateful and the evil, and you're following God, well, then you got to do the same thing. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, an earth-shattering perspective. Jesus also said that if anybody's going to come after me, if you're going to follow me, you're going to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Let these words sink into your ears. So when the disciples have a conversation about who among them is the greatest, they are so far out of step with Jesus, it's not even funny. And any Christians in history that has elevated themselves and thought of themselves in terms of this world's idea of greatness is completely out of step with Jesus. Don't blame God when Christians act like the rest of this world and do not act like Jesus. Go back and sort out what the words of Jesus actually said. You need a worldview. You need real words to live by. You need a real perspective that actually comes from God. Listen, I'm just a dumb redneck. And I'm telling you that as a dumb redneck, it's a simple thought. I'm living on a planet that's going around the sun at 100,000 mile an hour plus. And it's spinning while we're doing that at 1,000 mile an hour plus. That's what science tells me. I believe it. And that drives me to God. I need answers. I need to know how I should be living in this planet, because obviously it's God's. It's not mine. It's nobody I know. Nobody created this doggone thing except God. And that's not meant to throw us into a snit. It's just meant to give us a perspective, a good perspective that puts us in our right place and God in his right place. But what Jesus is doing is telling how this world was designed to be run. When Jesus, says all these words and says, let these words sink into your ears, this is how God is looking for this world to be run. So when Jesus takes a child and pulls him in close in a loving kind of way and says, receive the child, receive me. Receive me, receive the one who sent me. If you don't get it and understand it, he's talking about God. Well, then you need to keep reading until you see it, because that's exactly what he's saying. He's saying that if you can't receive a child like me, a child like this, you're not receiving me, and you're certainly not receiving the one who sent me. Now, it's this verse right here that is truly, immediately sent people into behaving differently. For the first 300 years of Christianity, there was no supports. Rome had no, care in the world about Christianity. It started to take notice when there was so many of them. And before that, and around that, and even in the time in which we live, the world just does not behave like Jesus is saying. Now, we assume that every culture of the world always loves the children. And when we think like that, we are uninformed. I have tried to bring this point to many people who really find it hard to believe me. But the ancient worlds and the current modern world around that we live in that has high infant mortality rates really doesn't value children. They only value them once they've reached an age where it seems like they're going to make it. And they only value the ones who are good looking and strong. That's the way this world operates. Jesus grabs a child and says, this is important. If you think everybody talks like Jesus, then you are not familiar with history. The Romans, were quite happy to expose children. The Spartans were familiar with them. They were always exposing children, looking for the toughest, but everybody did it. The Orientals did it. The Africans did it. Every culture exposed unwanted children. So when Jesus grabs a child and says, if you can't receive a child, then you can't receive me. He's changing the order of the world. And we now, we kind of embrace this without thinking about where it came from and how did we start thinking like this. This changed the conversation about success. This changed the conversation about children. This changed the conversation about dignity, human dignity, and this changed the conversation about compassion. What it means to be the greatest is not what we think in our natural state. Listen, all of the ideas that we have built into our framework of imagination right now, ideas like equality, compassion, consent, enlightenment, science, freedom, progress, come from the fact that Jesus got out there and people who followed Jesus got out there and started doing things differently. It all, so this passage isn't really about children. It's about how you think about who the greatest are. And when Jesus grabs a child, he's grabbing something out of the lowest realm of society, because you have to trust me or just go do your own reading on this. The ancient world, the old world, and even a lot of the modern world around us just simply does not value children. They are unvaluable. They're not valuable until they actually do stuff. So Jesus is upending. He's upending just the way that we think about success, upending what we think about greatness. And so, it's here that the idea of equality that we expect takes shape, that we believe in the equal moral status of every member of society in the human family, no matter what their rank, no matter what their race, no matter what their religion, their gender, or the sexuality is. It's Jesus who makes it very clear that we are to embrace other people, that we are to receive other people. Love God, love people. That is the two great commandments that Jesus gives us. And Jesus said, if you read the 10 commandments correctly, that's what you should get out of it. Love God, love people, receive people. To be great in this world is to be a receiver of people. And why should you be a receiver of people? Well, because God is a receiver of you. God is receiving people. And God isn't just receiving you, he's receiving people. So the way that we think about equality starts right here in what Jesus is saying, that the lowest levels of society are to be received. So the child is just an example. The Samaritans are to be received. The Gentiles are to be received. All the groups, all of the lowly groups are to be received. And that is what puts you on the road to greatness as far as God is concerned. Compassion begins right here. We believe the power, we believe that the powerful really don't have some sort of right to force themselves upon others. That's consent. We do not believe that people who are better than you have the right to force themselves upon you. Clearly, the disciples are at a stage and an age in life where they're better than the child, but they don't have a right over the child. The child has rights. That nobody should be forcing this child into, some sort of, submission, except for the parents who are training that child up in the ways to become a successful person. But compassion also. We believe in a society that should be judged by the way that it treats the weakest members of society. Where did we get that? Right here. We believe now that the weak should be taken care of. We believe now that the weak, have a voice and have a say. That's what we believe now. I'm not saying we act like that now, but we do believe that now. We believe in enlightenment. We believe in education for all. We really do. And where did we get that from? When Jesus takes a child and says, receive this child to receive me. Receiving the child opens the door to understand that everybody should have access to education. And, that the only way to really achieve the best out of human society is to educate everybody and to allow them to have access to education. This is not the way the old world worked, the ancient world worked, and it certainly doesn't even operate that way in the modern world in all sense of it in other places around the world. In the United States, we take this seriously, and many other countries take this seriously, but not all countries take this seriously. We believe in science and its ability to help us to understand the world around us. We believe in freedom, that people are not property, that children, are not property, that they're little people, that they, as people, have rights. And we believe in progress. We believe that as we invite the weak into our society, we get the best out of our society. Now listen, I have read pretty much all of the philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. I'm not saying I've read everything that they've written, but I have read enough to know that they don't believe this. When it comes to a comparison between Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle to Jesus, they're morons. I mean, absolute morons, because they believe that all children should be exposed if they don't measure up. And especially if they're unwanted, if the parents really aren't in a place to take care of them, they should just expose them, take them out to the dumps and expose them. And that's what Rome did. Rome was famous for this, and most other cultures are famous for just disposing of the children. And so it was people, Christians like Telemachus and Macrina, who we actually read a history about. But they were just following the patterns of other Christians who came before them, who would actually walk the dumps and pull up these exposed children, who were deformed children. They were children who were unwanted. They were children who were unnecessary. They were children who just didn't fit in. And it was totally fine. There was no laws prohibiting this. Zero laws until Rome became a Christianized kind of place. No laws existed in Rome or anywhere else in the world that protected children like this. But this is what we expect now. And that's what makes it so strange whenever we're not doing things to actually protect the children. But again, this is not about the children. This is about all the members of society who are weak. Nietzsche, the famous philosopher of the 1800s, who many people, very popular guy. He said many popular things. We get a lot of people today who think Nietzsche had it right. And Nietzsche hated Christianity because of one chief problem. And that is that Christianity, and he was able to sort this out clearer than most of us can, and that is that Christians and Christian society actually continues and insists on taking care of the weak. Nietzsche says this is ridiculous. Nobody should do this. Nobody should take care of the weak. The weak should be discarded. The weak should be gotten rid of. And any devious plan to get rid of the weak is fine as far as Nietzsche is concerned. And in all honesty, if Nietzsche, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were alive today to see the tactics that we use to get rid of the weak, they might even blush. I don't know. But the whole idea of we the people that we, I bet, take for granted here in the United States, believes that the consent of the governed is more important than the government. Where do we get that? We get that from the idea that the weak in society, the children in society, are actually just as important as anybody else. And that they ought to have a say, and that they ought to have, a voice, and that they ought to have representation. We believe that we the people, have the right to alter and abolish bad government because government is created by man. That's probably not said enough. Government is created by man. We're constantly, told that religion is created by man. Government is created by man. That is absolutely for sure. Religion created by man is worth talking about. Government, though, isn't worth talking about because it's all created by men and women, of course. You see, God-given freedom is the freedom to receive others because that's what God is doing. If you want to be in lockstep with God, then use your freedom to receive others, and that's what makes you great, especially the poor, especially the hungry, especially the sad, and especially the hated, the marginalized, the victimized. We ought to have a concern for all of them. We're in these things, and we're into these things because God is into these things, and because God has received us. We want God to receive us, and Jesus is simply flipping the table and flipping the script and saying, if you want God to receive you, then you've got to receive what God receives. And what God's receiving is the weak, the lowly, the meek, the sad, the hungry, the misfits, all of that. There is no place for you to be received by God and then to turn around and treat anybody poorly. That's what it means to follow Jesus. And that's what he sets up here. I mean, I'm not bragging. I'm just saying that this passage changed my life. I gave up at the age of 35 years old, I gave up a very good company to pursue, doing church work and teaching children. I taught in the public schools for 12 years. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying that I read this passage and I said, man, that's the kind of thing that God is into. So I want to be into it, at least for a little while. That doesn't mean I can't be into business too, which I am into business. That's great. I love business, but I know that God, he's not into business as much as he is, is the weak and the poor and those who need to hear. We're into these things because God is into these things. And my own child, my firstborn child, I was told, my wife was told, was going to be born with Down syndrome and that we ought to make plans to get rid of it. It was just said that plainly. We'll get the amniocentesis, and when it comes back negative, we ought to make plans to get rid of it. That stopped me and my wife in our tracks, and it really changed us to think about a better way. Jesus has given us that better way. Let's embrace what Jesus is doing. Let's embrace a whole different way of thinking, and let's continue to make the world in which we live in a place where equality, compassion, consent, enlightenment, and science and freedom and progress are important to everybody, not just some. To do that is to take up your cross and follow Jesus. This country that we live in that says we the people and starts its constitution off with we the people and has a declaration of independence that talks about equality and inalienable rights, consent to the governed, and alter and abolish government is only good as long as it holds to those platforms, which are Jesus platforms. Yeah. Anyhow, so that's our deep dive. And remember, Jesus began this conversation by saying, this generation is quite twisted and faithless. Well, let's reverse course. Let's get on board. Catch you next time.